Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to get us started here for the executive committee. I think it's good to see a lot of faces around the table. As many of you know, thanks to a certain storm, a lot of our southern partners are not able to make it here in person. We are sending them our best wishes. It's good to see you, Erica. I'm glad you were able to make it today. We're going to get started here. I'm going to go through approval of agenda. If there's any additions to the agenda, any items folks want to add, we have a fairly quiet agenda, which is good. Okay. Okay, not seeing any hands. Great. So the agenda is approved, as well as we'll do the approval of the May 2024 meeting. Okay, not seeing any concerns there. We'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment today? Okay, very good. Moving on, we're going to go to our legislative update, and we'll start with Alexander. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I have a brief presentation focused on the FY25 Senate CJS report language. Madeline, if you could bring up the presentation. Thank you. Ming from NOAA's budget office provided a good overview for the House and Senate report language on Monday. Broadly, the Senate report language looks very good for our priorities. The first item I want to discuss is fisheries surveys. The Senate report language included a $15 million plus up within fisheries data collection surveys and assessments, and included some strong language in the report language saying that the committee is concerned that National Marine Fisheries Service is not prioritizing and maintaining the needed level of fisheries surveys coverage, despite having received more than requested funding in previous fiscal years. This strong language is a theme throughout this bill. The committee has not been happy with some of National Marine Fisheries Service's performance. Next slide, please. Fisheries councils and commissions received a $1.7 million plus up and fully funded the horseshoe crab trawl survey. Next slide, please. Fisheries information networks was directed to be fully funded, and there was language regarding the fisheries effort survey and overstating fishery effort. Next slide, please. Where we were really successful this year is getting two main appropriations priorities into the Senate report language. This is where I think we've been having you guys participate in those Hill meetings has been really beneficial to us. New language directed $3 million to go towards the industry-based trawl survey pilot program, which was a new initiative for us that we discussed with NOAA and the survey failures of the Henry Bigelow. Another really important plus up is $1 million for South Carolina's Department of Natural Resources. This $1 million is to offset the research vessel Lady Lisa retrofit efforts. South Carolina reduced their expected expenditures on the RV Lady Lisa from around $3 million down to $1 million. And that's what this CDS request is going towards, is to offset those funds and continue CMAP coverage. Next slide, please. When I talk about the committee including strong language in their bill, they rejected the NOAA's proposed cuts to cooperative research. And in the underlined portion in the second bullet point, saying that the committee vehemently rejecting the proposed cuts to cooperative research is pretty extreme for them. It's pretty direct, and this is one of the items that we raised in our Hill meetings this year. So it's really positive to see that the committee is responding to many of our concerns. Interjurisdictional Fisheries Act grants, there was a proposed cut in the president's FY25 budget, and the committee also rejected that cut. Next slide, please. The North Atlantic right whale and lobster funding is kind of a carry-on continuation with a $4 million plus up to what's being passed through us. And the rest of the language is essentially carryover from previous years. These are the main points that I wanted to share with you guys. Overall, the Senate report language is very strong for our priorities. The House has a ways to go. So we are working on strategy for when and how to engage with the House. So when they consolidate the two bills, a lot of these priorities carry over into what becomes law. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, I think the disparity between what is there right now is a little concerning, but as I mentioned on Monday, I hate to seem biased, but the Senate bill certainly does seem like something we could support much easier. Any questions for Alexander? Go ahead, Roy.
Thank you, Joe. Alex, what was that? Was there a figure associated with the Chesapeake Menhaden study?
So there wasn't any dollar amount attached to that request. The language was slightly stronger than previous years, but this is another area of improvement for us. So I'll be working with Bob on how to appropriately engage the Virginia State Legislature, federal government in future years, future opportunities. So it's something that still needs work.
Pat and then John. All right, let's do that. Eric, Pat, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kelleher. So I'm totally biased to this. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, which is not my thing, you know. But I just, you know, I really want to thank Mr. Law and my fellow commissioners that went to bat for the $3 million for what is called the industry-based survey, but I think it's going to be rebranded to be called the Regional Fisheries Survey. I think that's really important. And there's a lot of other stuff in this that I think that, you know, visits to the Hill really paid off really well. But my question is, what's the next step? Because the House is a different thing. So what's the timeline for the battle between the House and the Senate to get this all done? And what would you recommend we do in the meantime?
Yeah, so it's going to take a while. The Senate is in a stronger position for negotiations. Their bill was passed on a bipartisan basis, and the House bill was much more partisan, but it's going to take months. So we're working on figuring out strategy. I will be asking you guys, some of you, to engage through calls or video conferencing calls with targeted congressional offices. So stay tuned is my answer.
Yeah, I mean, right now everybody's on vacation. So, you know, my idea is that I want to meet with my people from the House in their home court in Rhode Island, because they're all going to be around, whether or not they're working or not, I don't know, you know, but I think that's a pretty good idea. You know, going to see them on the Hill, that's great. But when you reach out to them right in their backyard, I think that that's pretty effective. So that would be my recommendation. And I forgot to say aloha to you, Mr. Kelleher, this morning. So aloha.
Thanks, Eric. Pat?
More of a comment, Mr. Chairman. Alexander's doing a great job kind of herding cats here with the states. I think what he's presented here shows certainly an increased effort from this body on the Hill that is paying off. So I just want to give kudos to Alexander and to Bob for the work that's being done on the Hill. You know, we all work at this issue very differently. I'd like to think, you know, we had a little hand in that screen right there. I'd like to think we had a little bit of a hand in that screen right there, but the rest of those line items up there have a strong thumbprint of the commission on them. And so I just want to, again, give a shout out here. You know, it's great work. It's paying off. We need to continue this focused effort. And so just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Couldn't agree more. I think, you know, in a time when we worry about the distractions that are on the Hill, to know that, that the commission has had a voice there is certainly comforting. John?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the update, Alexander. Eric's question pretty much covered everything I was curious about. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
Just to follow up on what Mr. Reed said a minute ago about, you know, meeting folks in their kind of in their home court. You know, if ASMFC, Alexander and I can help set up any of those visits, you know, here in DC or back home in the districts, we are more than happy to do that. You know, you guys probably have more contacts at home, but we can, you know, reach out to the offices here and try to make any of those contacts. And if there's value in either Alexander or I traveling to those meetings, we're happy to do that too. So I think it's worthwhile. So, you know, let us know if we can help at all.
Recently, the Legislative Committee discussed the State Voting Act introduced by Senator Shaheen. I'll kick this over to Bill Hyatt to give a brief overview of the bill and our discussion.
Thanks, Alex. So yeah, State Voting Act, it's Senate Bill 4113, introduced by Senator Shaheen of New Hampshire. I'm guessing that this is a bill that, unless you attended our last legislative committee meeting, you probably haven't heard of, although it was sent out in the supplemental materials for this meeting. Basically, this bill provides states with the authority to collect additional fees in association with their state vote registration programs. The bill doesn't mandate anything to states. It just provides states with an additional tool to work with if they choose to take advantage of that tool. And it allows for revenues that are generated through these additional fees to state voting registrations to be used to fund rescue operations, safe boating programs at the state level, and aquatic invasive species programs at the state level. And just a little bit of background. Over the last 7-8 years or so, there have been a number of states that have utilized this effort. They have attached fees. Connecticut is one of them. We put an aquatic invasive species fee to our state boating registration slips that are paid in order to get your boat registered. And I think there were 6 or 7 states, maybe a few more, that did this. Subsequently, the U.S. Coast Guard, in their state audit process, looked at this and recognized that it runs afoul of some technical language in the federal law. So Senator Shaheen's bill simply aims to address these technical changes and to shift back and make sure that this type of activity, putting these fees associated with boat registrations, making sure that passes legal muster. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is working strongly to try to get this bill passed, and they're looking for other organizations such as ours to support them in that. A little bit of history stepping back. States that have implemented and put in place these fees have historically used them for freshwater aquatic invasive species programs. However, there's no reason that these dollars couldn't be used also on marine projects. To my mind, Phragmites control and marsh management comes right to the top of the list as a possible marine use. Also for management and control of aquatic invasive species like blue catfish, flathead catfish, snakeheads that are potentially affecting productivity of marine estuarine areas. And there's probably a whole host of other uses that could be put in place. In addition, states can actually prorate any revenues generated through this measure if they so choose, according to boat registration data, boat use data, et cetera. So it can be parlayed between freshwater and marine to have benefits in both arenas. The bottom line of this is that this bill is all upside and no downside. It doesn't mandate anything of the states. It doesn't take anything away from the states. It doesn't provide any money directly, but it does provide them with the states with an additional fundraising tool if they decide to use it, if they have a use for something of that nature. So this was brought up at our legislative committee meeting a week ago, and with the idea that Alex would subsequently reach out to Senator Shaheen's office and to the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and look at potential ways for our group, for the commission to support this effort if it is the will of the group. So Alex, I don't know if you can update people on any of those conversations as to what they're looking for from us.
Yeah, they're looking for letters of endorsement, comments, and quotes. So anything that we could provide, I'm happy to do that, subject to your approval.
And I would just add on behalf of the legislative committee, since this bill is entirely 100% upside, I would hope that this group would find a way to do that. It's not a big thing, it's a little thing, but it's all good.
Great, Bill. Thank you very much. Any questions for Bill or Alexander on this? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill, you said you already have these fees in Connecticut. Was that done through the legislature? Did they give you authority to raise these fees? Because, I mean, it's nice to be told you can do it, but getting that done at a state level seems like it'd be pretty difficult.
The answer is yes. In 2019, we put it through our state legislature, got it through, and I personally shepherded that one through and worked on the drafting of it. And again, it was something that was just broadly supported at the state level by a broad constituency. So the challenges at the state level were simply the time and effort to do it. It wasn't anything was ever opposed at any level.
Did they let you set the fees, or the fees set in legislation?
The fees were set in legislation.
Alexander, if you could send something into the group in writing, I think that would help, especially to share this back home.
Will do.
Okay. So I realize as Dan pointed out, it'd be nice to have something to share, but is there any objection to what Bill is suggesting here? Not seeing any. Very good. So that's a plan for us. Very good. Thank you. We'll see a draft of that. Move on to the next item. I want to, I'll preface this a little bit that we've, as XCOM, we've had a discussion on this. And this is House bill from Representative Graves' office. The XCOM had a chance to talk about this, and our legislative committee had a chance to look this over. I hope all of you, again, have had a chance to read through the comments there. We're very fortunate, and I want to say thank you to Anderson Tran, who is here from Representative Graves' office, to kind of further this discussion as they are shepherding this bill. And through our last XCOM, we certainly have had some concerns. We know that MRIP is a survey that has had issues, challenges for management. but also something that's fairly long-standing now. And that type of time series is something that's incredibly valuable for our stock assessments. So I think if we can kick this discussion off, I don't know exactly how we want to do this, Bob. Yeah, well, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, just, the background on this bill is, and Anderson can provide more background on it than I can, but, we've had a number of conversations, sort of smaller groups, but then the executive committee got together, I don't know, 3 weeks or so ago and had a conversation about this, sort of focused on it. And during that conversation, there were some concerns that were brought up about sort of East Coast being different from the Gulf Coast and some unique things we had. And this is very much paraphrasing what the executive committee said, but there's concerns that, the longstanding time series of data, as Joe said, interrupting that or ending up in a situation where different states along the East Coast were implementing different data collection programs may cause significant problems in management and stock assessments down the road. And, the conversation was more focused on the East Coast states seem to be comfortable supplementing MRIP rather than replacing MRIP, even at a state-by-state level. The compatibility of being able to compare what neighboring states are doing or states in other regions are doing was an important issue for the members of the executive committee. And so the day after the executive committee, Alexander and I went over and met with Anderson. He spent more time with us, and now he's back for more. We appreciate that. And I want to extend the thank you for the openness of Mr. Graves' office. And, you guys have been great sharing documents and drafts and spending a lot of time with us. So we appreciate that. And coming here and sitting around this table with all these state directors and others can be intimidating. So we really appreciate that too. So, that's the background on it. And Alexander and I shared, the sort of a summary of that executive committee call with Anderson, a few weeks ago. And it was a great conversation and appreciate his time. And I think it was constructive, but then, we figured it'd be valuable to have more of a back and forth rather than sort of staff being in the middle of that conversation, having, a direct conversation between state directors and Anderson as a representative of Mr. Graves' office and one of the primary authors of the bill. So I think with that, I don't know, Anderson, do you want to make any opening comments or do you want to hear perspectives of folks around the table? It's really, I think we can go either way on that as RHO. So it's up to you, Anderson.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a couple comments and then really do want to just mostly hear from you guys and try to answer questions. I recognize it's a 20+ page bill. Frankly, I wrote it with Ledge Council and sometimes I have a hard time getting through it. So I think ideally would love to just try to answer questions for you guys.
Anderson, can you pull the mic closer just a little louder? Thank you, appreciate that.
Is that better? Yeah, we'd just love to try to answer some questions, but do want to give you guys just a little bit of background about myself. I came in as a NOAA Sea Grant Fellow a few years ago, started with Congressman Young, and then moved over to Congressman Graves and he passed away. And so this is not both my boss and myself as his staff, we are not folks who are just kind of willy-nilly doing fisheries policy and data. It is both of we are about as Renin as you can get on the Hill, which I recognize is not quite as good as y'all, which is why we're here today to try to get some additional information from you guys and get y'all's perceptions. But realistically, what we're trying to solve here is one overarching issue, and that is just bad data that we are receiving through NOAA's recreational programs primarily. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, my late boss was the one who wrote that back in the 70s. It was not set up for recreational fishing. Just to be very clear, it wasn't. And so with the uptick in recreational fishing that we've seen over the last couple of decades, there has got to be some level of modernization. Otherwise, what we have been seeing, what we saw in the Gulf, is what we're seeing now. We think largely in the South Atlantic is overly cautious management because the data is poor. And it's hard to fault managers for saying, well, we've got this high range of error, so we need to be a little careful. We get that, but we would love to get you guys better data so that you guys can make better, more precise decisions. So with that, I know a lot of people have been calling this an MRIP bill. It does reform MRIP to an extent, but it is not just MRIP. We want to put that out there, make sure that's clear. There is additionally fishery independent data that we are looking to reform the processes for a bit as well. And also looking at third-party data, which is just helpful to confirm, I guess, what we're seeing through whatever data stream we're primarily using. I know just to upfront mention a couple of things that you guys raised is the valuing the historical time series of MRIP. Certainly get that. It's a invaluable piece of, well, collection of data that we've got. There's nothing in here that wants to get rid of that. Ideally, we would like to be calibrating it. Right now, this is an oversimplification, but let's say it's in feet. We would like to calibrate it to inches, the historical time series, rather than the opposite direction, taking inches and saying, well, best we can do is a foot. But otherwise, there's nothing in here that wants to, aims anyways, to get rid of the historical time series of MRIP. And additionally, there's nothing in here that tries to completely get rid of MRIP. I think supplement is a much better word. We are trying to effectively allow states to take over what they feel like they are capable of doing, and in fact, give you guys assistance in doing that. And then if you've got better data than what MRIP is producing for specific species, then we'll turn that over and we'll have no use that data instead. So again, just want to make that clear, at least that is the intention of the bill. Again, drafted it with Ledge Council, so certainly isn't perfect, and happy to take a look at specific language. But just wanted to make clear what our intent was with the bill. So with that, I'll kick it back to you guys. Happy to answer questions, and please don't be shy. I've answered quite a number of questions on this, so I don't think you guys are gonna bother me. And again, thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk about this. It's something that's really important to my boss, and so would love for you guys to be supportive, but certainly first and foremost want to get it right.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. And for your sake, just so you know, the folks around the table and some of the individuals online are members of the commission's executive committee, or sorry, and we do have others as well. But so we have commissioners. We don't have any federal partners at the table here today. We did meet with them on Monday. I think it was encouraging to see, and they put out a public announcement as well, their commitment to working with states on state programs. I do think that's important. But as you pointed out, the only way that works for us is that those methods of collecting data are somehow able to be calibrated to an earlier time series. That is one of the big concerns we have. The uniqueness of ASMFC is that we're a big family, right? I mean, compared to our Gulf and Pacific partners, there's a lot of us at the table trying to work together. And we do have species like bluefish that cover the coast. And so, that's a whole bunch of data streams to think about. So I'm going to open it up. Any folks that want to make comments, like I said, I think we've all had a chance to see the bill and the legislative committee's comments. We've had a crack at this as well. So Jay, you want to get us started?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe for you, Mr. Chair, before I kind of start, I got a bunch of things, and so I'm just going to hit like one, give other people space, and then I'm happy to kind of come back at it. Thank you very much. I appreciated that intro, gave some context, which is helpful. And so maybe I'll preface by saying that, I think the intent of the bill is noble and good. And, I could sort of see that even upon kind of reading it cold. And so I just offer these comments as something, you know, that caught my attention, our attention in Rhode Island. And I'll start just with a general comment. You know, I think some of the specificity in the bill will likely lead to unintended consequences. And so one of those specific ones I'll highlight is, you know, the PSE threshold stuff in the bill. And so it specified 30% as this, you know, kind of meaningful threshold. And just based on some work that's out there, specifically John Wiedemann out of Rutgers University has done some management strategy, or I'll call it simulation work, where they actually highlighted 50% as kind of like that upper threshold. So, you know, that might be something you want to think about. And again, unintended consequences are you start losing data that may be meaningful and important for management and assessment. The other aspect of this is just the focus on PSE, and I understand completely why the focus is on PSE, because that's the metric that we get. But it's not a magic metric. It's not even a great metric. I think it's just one that has been used because it's intuitive, but there are underlying, it's just kind of a recalculation of a standard statistical quantity. And so, you know, that might not be the one to go after or to focus on. There are other ways of looking at the uncertainty that may better get to the intent that you have in the bill. So I'll stop there with my PSE comments and make room for others to make comments. Thank you.
And if I may just respond really quickly, the PSE threshold, the 30% number we got from NOAA Fisheries, we understand that that is the ideal number, I guess I would say. Well, ideally it would be 0, but that's unrealistic. But that number we got from NOAA Fisheries, I think there is room to have conversation about what that number is. And in fact, we are awaiting technical assistance from NOAA right now to figure out kind of how we narrow the universe of species that this may apply to. Right now, I think the stat they gave us was this is going to affect like 300 out of 307 species that they have. For one, for us, that's like, well, that's the reason we think this is necessary, but certainly we don't want to take away valuable resources. So there's a second thing that we've done in that to try to tighten that universe of species, and that is trying to be specific about not just 30% threshold, but what else would need to be necessary. It's got to be an important species. That's a little generic right now, but we're working with Bill on trying to how to tighten that up. And then additionally, there's a state petition process that's available to try to tighten it up. But again, we are working with NOAA Fisheries to try to tighten that universe to make it a little more reasonable. As far as PSE not being necessarily the right metric, I'd love to kick that back to you, because that is something that we had conversations with NOAA and national academies about, as well as particular Gulf folks. And we asked the question several times, is there a better metric than PSE? And we never heard one. So if you do think there's one, would love to hear it. Happy to follow up about it too. But that's kind of how we landed on that.
Yeah, thanks for starting us off there, Jay. No, and I appreciate that. You know, one of the folks at National Academies has tapped several times to have to look at the recreational data collection program back in the day when it was MRFs, and then into a review on MRIP was Cynthia Jones and Dr. Luis Barbieri. You know, Cynthia always mentions the difference between precision and accuracy. And you know, again, going back to having that long-standing time series, knowing that there is at least some level of precision and consistency there is important. The kind of thing that allows us to get through stock assessments for so many of our species are fairly long lived, and you need a time series of several decades to get through that. So I think that's something to consider as well. Including new data streams that supplement are fantastic, but understanding that it's going to be decades before those have that same level of value. Other comments or questions? We'll go to Jason and then John. Oh, sorry, Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the first half of the bill, the consultation process that's sort of envisioned seems to be based on 3 potential triggers. So a concern over PSE of the data, which we just talked about, that sort of 30% threshold, or a concern that the estimates may be unreliable because it's either a pulsed fishery or a species that's encountered infrequently. I think a lot of the issues we've been dealing with around this table and with our federal partners and the Mid-Atlantic Council in recent years, to me, have to do more with bias, potential bias in the data. So not that we're concerned that the estimates are imprecise, but that they might be potentially biased, So it's not that, we're not throwing the darts at the dartboard and putting them in a tight spot. We're, just not hitting the bullseye. There doesn't seem to be any language in here that contemplates the possibility of, if a state or a group of states were able to come forward with some information that suggests that estimates for a particular species are biased, that it could trigger this sort of consultation process. So I think that could be a potential addition.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, and to that end, one of the conversations that happened on Monday with our federal partners was a discussion about the further exploration of the bias introduced into the FES survey. The fact that rearranging a couple of questions could potentially introduce that much bias is intense. But knowing that, me personally, the idea of trying to combine 6 different surveys and handing that over to a peer review, I'm just not sure what they would be able to do with that. And what we find is, in the face of uncertainty, since the ultimate goal is the sustainable management of these resources, in the face of uncertainty, we get as cautious as we feel we need to be. And unfortunately, that can turn into the loss of a lot of fish. We've seen that with species like bluefish, where we, that just changing that level of uncertainty can be the loss of 1 million fish that year, So I believe, John, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the discussion of this, Anderson. I didn't notice in the bill, I may have missed it, anything about funding, and recreational data collection is expensive. And I know that back when we were one of the states that wasn't thrilled about the idea of having to take over the APIS part of MRIP, because at the time, I think NOAA Fisheries term was funding erosion, where they saw it being level funded, which meant their expectation was that after a certain number of years, states would have to supplement on their own to keep the same level of sampling, or else the level of sampling would drop. Obviously, to get good recreational data, we need more sampling, not less sampling. Where would the funds come from to improve recreational data collection and for these states? I mean, we heard from NOAA Fisheries that they gave us a budget update on Monday, and they're looking at very tight funding. So just curious.
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. And there's some nitty gritty legislative process involved here. So bear with me a little bit. One thing that we will say is NOAA Fisheries right now is sitting on an absolute nest egg that they aren't tapping. The Inflation Reduction Act gave them, I want to say, $2.6 billion to really do whatever they want with. They won't tap it. They're not requesting additional funds in the president's budget. So for NOAA Fisheries to say that they don't have the money is difficult. But what I will also say is this is set up as a grant program, which obviously indicates that you guys will be getting money. There is not a dollar amount in it. In the 118th Congress, we've got certain floor protocols, which say effectively you can't bring anything to the floor that increases spending. Whether we want to kind of try to override that, or we want to try to find an offset, which is basically cutting spending from somewhere else in the federal budget, literally anywhere else. The first thing we need to know is how much money will this cost? NOAA Fisheries is working on getting us some estimates on that. Who knows when we will see them? But we know at our state level that it's about a couple $1 million, maybe $3 to $5 million to set it up in the Gulf, and then about 1 to 2 to run it each year. What I will tell you is this is an ongoing problem in Congress, and Congress has ponied up money. The Great Red Snapper count that we did in the Gulf was $10 million in federal funds. They funded a South Atlantic Great Red Snapper count. And so this is an issue that has enough attention that we do think we can get funding for. But first and foremost, particularly with the floor protocols that we have right now, we got to know how much money it is. And additionally, figuring out and us having a conversation with NOAA of, well, can we tap some of that nest egg that you're just sitting on? Yeah.
And just to be fair, what I was talking about, that was said a long time ago about NOAA before the IRA. So I don't know what the response would be now.
Thanks, John. Other comments? Jay, we want to go back?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I'll stay on this funding topic for a moment. And so, you know, I like the idea of funding recreational data collection initiatives. I guess my concern was doing that to the detriment of MRIP, like taking away from MRIP to, you know, kind of do these other things. And so I think that would be a mistake. And a comment you made in your intro, I'll kind of highlight for the next part of my comment. And, you know, and I'm just offering you another concept to kind of consider. So, you know, we have MRIP and it's built, it's just like the NOAA trawl survey, right? It's kind of this catch-all that you have this source of information that you try to optimize across hundreds of species, right? And so it's not perfect for any one of those. It just sort of, and the MRIP is the same exact thing. It's a survey that's meant to be a catch-all, capture all of these recreational species. And so it's not optimized for any particular one, and therefore it's not optimized really for any of them very well, you know, specifically, but it's still a valuable source of information. And, you know, it's important. What you had said in your comment earlier was, well, if you have MRIP and it's not doing a good job and you have a state source of data, you'd swap it in. And so my comment, you know, to you on that, or new concept maybe to consider is you don't necessarily have to pick one or the other. I think there are statistical techniques out there where you can actually use the information from both. Again, a lot of research has been done on ensembling different types of data, different types of models. And what you find is that they kind of bolster the weaknesses, right? Every method has assumptions and weaknesses associated with it. And so when you kind of collectively pull them together, often they can kind of supplement each other. So instead of like this idea of replacing one with the other, finding ways to bring them together to produce a better estimate. And this could get back to those comments about PSC and thresholds and things like that. It's kind of a different way rather than just kind of throwing more sampling, more money at the problem. You can use these, you know, statistical attempts to kind of do a better job with that. And I'll just say Rhode Island is a big proponent of these, ancillary data collection projects and investigating those things. So I'm very supportive of those things and was happy to see them in the bill. I just want to make sure, one is not, I don't think we want to end up in a situation where you're just kind of choosing your own adventure, right? You want to do something that can be kind of systematic across the range. So thanks.
Yeah, now I'm going to respond to that. And I think, Mr. Chair, to your comments as well, right now what we faced in the Gulf, and I'm sure you guys are at least somewhat aware of it, is we've had issues with calibration. And there's really, I guess, two different types of calibration that we're having issues with. One is our Gulf state programs to MRIP, and the other is our Gulf state programs to other Gulf state programs. And so that's something that I guess I'll take those both in turn. One, I think, Mr. Chair, to your comments is we have had issues in the Gulf, frankly, where the programs are not quite the same. And so we're seeing different calibration ratios for different states. There seems to be some recalculations that keep occurring, which, I'm not a statistician, but I don't fully understand how we can every few months recalibrate and find new ways to do it and have wildly different calibration ratios. So one thing that we have kind of talked about with some of our state directors in the Gulf is not trying to, right now, maybe we'll say we'd have apples and oranges. And again, this is a completely simplification, but right now, let's say we have apples and oranges, trying to get everybody onto effectively the same fruit. And so let's say we'll have Fuji apples, Gala apples, sweet red apples, but everything is apples, so that we can kind of be more on a regional track, but still allow those individual states to have the specificity and the flexibility that they need, so that, for instance, Florida, who has a much larger coastline, their data is still comparable to Mississippi, who has a much smaller coastline, but they can run their programs how they need to, and the data can compare later. Excuse me. So I would say that state to state, this isn't we are not envisioning every state is for themselves. It's very important to us in the Gulf that all the states stay together and work collaboratively, which is in part why the commission is such a part of this bill. So I'll say that. The other thing I will say is on the calibration from between state data and MRIP data. What we have been seeing, in part because of the state confusion, is that NOAA Fisheries wants to calibrate everything to the MRIP, where in our eyes, if we've got state data that, well, let's say right now, one's in inches, one's in centimeters, it still doesn't make sense for us to calibrate them to feet. Is that really the lowest common denominator? I don't know. That's what they're going for. But trying to figure out a way so that we can get everybody in some sort of inches. We fully understand that there has to be some level of blending of the data streams, but we don't want the state data diluted by having to move to a federal system that is, like you said, optimized for hundreds of species rather than a few very important ones.
Quick follow-up just to offer the comment. So calibration is one technique which there's a relation here, but I guess what I was talking about gets more at what you were talking about. So ensembling is not calibration. It's kind of a different approach. So you keep, the survey can stay the survey. It's not trying to become another survey, that comment of watering down, like you said. So just to offer, the technique is a little bit different. And so a different comment to consider, a different concept to consider, sorry.
Okay, would love to follow up with that maybe offline. that what we have seen in the Gulf and seems to be different than what we've been getting, what we see particularly in the Pacific and also honestly in the Northeast, is that NOAA Fisheries seems very, very adamant not to take in additional data streams. And so that's really where our frustration is coming from, is that we've developed these, it was statutorily authorized, and NOAA's disregarding it. And so I think, yeah, I would love to hear more about what you guys are able to do, because frankly, we had a conversation with some folks from the Pacific Coast the other day, and they were like, how is this going to affect us? We said, honestly, more or less, we're just trying to get what you guys have. We'd like to have maybe a little bit more specificity, so that states can run their programs how they need to, instead of the exact same survey for the full region. But realistically, that's what we are trying to do, is input additional data streams that in our eyes are better, more timely, more accurate.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think one of the things that we should be considering is the data that goes into assessments versus the data used for everyday management. In the Mid-Atlantic, one of the things that we walked away from a while ago is in-season closures for the recreational fisheries based on wave estimates, right? And I think that was very valuable. The way I read the language, one of the things that concerned me was, although it was voluntary, since we do have so many states put in, the way the data went into the assessment was at a regional or even a coast-wide level. And that actually helps the precision, right? It actually lowers the PSCs for the estimates that are in the assessment. But if you started plucking states out that wanted to, again, this was the concept of it was just insert one and not the other. So pulling out MREP and only using state data streams, those other states now have lost that regional level of precision and are at a state level, which actually lowers the precision for the MREP estimates. But as Jason mentioned, if there's that idea of ensemble data going into the assessments, then I think that's only a good thing. I don't really see the negatives there. And using perhaps different data for management would I think is somewhat of an interesting concept. I did have one question, again, going back to the wording of the bill itself. I will just fully admit, it seemed a little nebulous to me on whether or not we were just talking about federally managed species. And one of the reasons why that's really important here to the commission is that a lot of our most important recreational species are jointly managed with councils. And so if there were some difference in how those things were handled, it would put us in a really tough spot. So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
I'm not sure I'm totally clear on what the question is. Do you mind kind of?
It's just there are council managed species. And like I said, we have some jointly managed species, but ASMFC manages some solely. So we're tackling those at the state waters level. And I didn't know the impact of this legislation on if would be a difference between the two.
So let me go back and look at the text of the bill. Effectively, we have a couple things to consider here. One, we are the federal Congress, and so we've got to work in federal land. The way that we tried to draft this was effectively the state can get this grant program to run recreational data collection programs. The hook for us is for federal species. However, for instance, LA Creole, what we have in Louisiana, covers red snapper, but it also covers redfish. So they would be able to collect federal dollars to run La Creole, but it is the hook for us is that it's a federal species, but that doesn't limit the dollars to only being used on federal species. Let me know if that answers the question. If not, I'm happy to keep going.
No, I think, I think a lot of us understand that, and I appreciate that. I guess I should have, I don't know that there could have been another answer to that. I think though that some of this would impact us in different ways. So, there's the triggering of if there is like a National Academies group that comes in, if that only hits federally managed species, and if it triggers certain stock assessment schedule, then that could also impact those species that aren't at that federal level that we manage, but we also rely on those same assessment programs and are trying to fit in species like red drum here, striped bass, menhaden into that same schedule. So I guess there's a nexus there that I recognize maybe the bill language can't completely tackle, but I just wanted to make everyone aware of it. Other questions or comments, Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to focus on that for a minute because I'm not sure I caught the answer. So let's talk about a fish like cobia, which I think is a poster child in a way for, what this bill might be trying to get at. It's a pulse fishery, but it is now transitioned from a council managed to a commission managed species. It is a state managed species at this point. So would states be able to apply for grants for cobia data collection programs if it is not a federally managed species? That's just what I'm trying to understand, is kind of the clear answer to that question.
So honestly, I'm going to have to think on that a little bit. I think my understanding is in the Gulf, it is still federally managed. And so I think, excuse me again, I think what we're kind of getting into with that is it federal jurisdiction as opposed to actually federally managed? And this is sort of thinking out loud, which is always dangerous, but right now in the Gulf, and I want to be clear, this is not the intention of this bill, but right now in the Gulf, we do have state management of several species. Red snappers, maybe the poster child for us. And yes, the intention of this bill would be for it to be able to be support funding for red snapper. And so I think my answer to you is yes, but may need to follow up on that, because I think that gets a little bit into the distinction of does the federal government actually have jurisdiction as opposed to actually are they actually managing it? And again, we have to, the whole thing's voluntary because we can't force you all as the states to do anything, and we wouldn't want to.
Yeah, Lynn, I realize my version of that question might have been a little confusing. I think part of what was said was that the idea of setting up a program for a state would be about data collection for recreational fisheries, and there would be different species in there. But my recollection of some of the language in this is that there are triggers that would require an assessment to update more or less to, because of new data. So with a species like cobia, although we've taken over management, we still look to the CDAR process and if that schedule starts changing, we might be told we don't have time to work on your cobia assessment was one of my concerns. Okay. Other comments? Jay, anything else in the back? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just maybe a quicker one. There was a discussion about committees in here. And I just, the thing that kind of popped into my head and the others in Rhode Island who helped me kind of look through this bill was, no particular issue with that. I think it'd be good to have a committee that is focused on recreational fishing in general. I guess it was just a matter of making sure it's not duplicative or in competition with, we want things, and you said this yourself, you want things that are supplementing, not competing per se. And so, there's lots of committees out there, Rec Tech Committee and SSCs, and just to make sure that the identity of this committee is unique. I'll also mention that the universe of, fisheries scientists, quantitative fisheries scientists in particular, is pretty small. So you're probably going to have the same people on there anyway. So, yeah, just a comment on the committee, just kind of making sure, and I'm sure you've done this, but due diligence of kind of making sure you're kind of vetting the existing committees first and making sure you're creating a committee that has kind of a unique identity that's supplementing what's already going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we talked with the national academies and drafting it, and they have their own internal process to do that. And so we put a little bit of language in there of just trying to make sure that it remains unbiased. But otherwise, we are largely, frankly, deferring to what the national academies does as their regular procedures in that. And then the other thing I will just note on that is that the intention is not to override the SSC or the council process. It is to provide an additional option to send down to them. And yeah, they can take it up, they can tweak it, they can do what they need to do. But just providing, frankly, another option, another resource to look at it.
Yeah, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't know that came up in some of our discussions as a concern, is that, the potential loss of the process that's there now, where it may be working well for some of the councils. So I appreciate that, and I don't know that we have any suggestions on how to firm up that wording, that process is still expected to work as it does. But since it did raise so many flags within this group, it might be something we can continue to think about. And I don't know if there's any hands online. Apologize, I haven't been looking. Okay.
I don't see.
Oh, okay. Anyone else? Okay. So Bob, I don't know, do you want to kind of take us out on a follow-up for this?
Yeah, I guess this bill is going to continue to evolve, and as Anderson said, they're waiting on a fair amount of feedback from NOAA Fisheries, which may change some pretty significant pieces of this. So it seems like the best course forward, and this is my opinion, and everybody around the table can disagree if they want, is just to continue this dialogue. And as this bill evolves, it will, Anderson, I'm confident we'll be in touch and ask questions, and we can do the same. And Alexander and I can go over the hill and talk to Anderson anytime if there's different feedback from this group, or if as the East Coast states talk some more, if there are other questions or concerns or changes that you would like to see, we can convey those really easily to Anderson. And but it doesn't sound like there's, at this point, it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty on where this bill, the final text, might look like. So I think we just keep an eye on this and keep the dialogue going. There are, as we've identified, a number of unique things that are different between the Gulf and the Atlantic, and that I think that's what makes this really difficult. So we got a bunch of little states that are trying to sort of stay together, and the Gulf has a few big states, and the management in the Gulf is different. In-season adjustments and other things happen down there, and you need really robust data to do that effectively. And luckily, for now, anyway, we don't have in-season adjustments for recreational fisheries on the East Coast. And, you know, we kind of set a suite of regulations and see how they go for the year and then adjust for the subsequent year. And I don't know if that's even allowed in the Gulf. And that's a, you know, different sort of level of guidance from NOAA sometimes on recreational fisheries. But I think, you know, that's my perspective on just keeping the dialogue going. And you know, as more thoughts come up along the East Coast, we can convey those to Anderson and Mr. Graves' office and you know, keep tabs on this if everybody's comfortable with that.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Erica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Bob, and thank you to the executive committee for continuing this conversation. I think it's been really helpful for us. And Anderson, thank you for being here. I'm encouraged about the openness of your office and the receptiveness that the congressman and you have towards the feedback that's been given. And it's clear to me that you're seeking guidance from the experts. We've got some experts certainly here around the table who've dealt with MRIP and trying to figure out the best ways to track recreational landings. And I'm looking at Jason over there in particular. I think that for us and our individual concerns, it might be most productive to continue this dialogue, maybe not at this table, but one-on-one, so that you can really dive into the issues that you have as states and state reps, and that the congressman has and Anderson has. So I just want to thank you for this conversation. I think it's been really great.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, and I mean, I think I speak on all of our behalf. We truly appreciate this dialogue and you coming down. Pat, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anderson, thank you for being here today. I'm a long way from the Gulf of Mexico, but as far away as anybody can get at this table. I have a lot of concerns about this bill and how it could impact data requirements on the East Coast. But the fact that you're open to this dialogue really is encouraging. So I appreciate that. I think there's a lot to solve here. This is a very complex bill. As you say, it goes beyond MRIP as well. So I just want to make sure we're not creating a new problem here. And so I would just leave you with a question. I don't know if you've thought about this from just a Gulf perspective as a pilot to see if something could change. While if I ask that or say that only because I don't know what the timing is associated with, you know, with this bill and how your boss might be thinking about it from a timeline perspective. So I just leave you with that. But again, appreciate the dialogue on this.
Yeah, thank you. As far as timeline goes, you know, if you guys aren't aware, my boss is not running for re-election. So obviously we would love to move it by the end of the year. Whether or not the Senate's going to do anything with it, who knows? We would love for them to, but we also want to make sure that we're getting it right. And as far as a pilot goes, I think the way that, frankly, my boss is thinking about it is the Gulf was kind of the guinea pig. And in part, this bill is not just to create a new system, it is to smooth out the issues that we had with the Gulf, largely those calibration issues, and then provide that on-ramp for anyone who would want to take it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that impacts millions of people, right? And I think what you just laid out is something that we can all agree to, that including NOAA. As I mentioned, we had our state directors meeting with our federal partners, and it does seem that they're, you know, committed to moving on this data collection forward into something that is going to be hopefully much more efficient and helpful for management at the level that we try and do this every day. So with that, I think we'll wrap this up. I haven't seen any other hands coming up. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Our next agenda item is future annual meetings, and I'll go to Laura.
Thank you, Joe. So in October of 2024, which is 3 months away, we'll be meeting in Annapolis, Maryland on the 21st through the 24th. And I'm going to ask Lynn if she wants to say anything about the meeting.
Thank you. I think the meeting is coming together. Excuse me. We've got a welcome dinner that'll be planned at the offices of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is a beautiful building. The dinner will be on the Naval Academy grounds, a lovely venue. And we are doing something a little new. We're going to do a breakfast and a 0.01K fun run on the grounds of in the Naval Stadium itself. So people have a chance to enjoy the interior of the Naval Stadium. We'll see what we can pull together. I would encourage anybody who are thinking about awards for this, such as most impractical shoes. If you have any ideas for that, just let me know. Just a fun way to have breakfast and get outside a little bit first thing in the morning, and I think it'll be fun.
Thank you, Lynn. In 2025, we're going to be in Delaware. John and I are talking about location. Anything to say, John, or are we good?
No, all the sites are very exciting in Delaware, of course.
Thank you, John. 2026, we're going to be back in Rhode Island. 2027, we will be in South Carolina. And 2028, we'll be in Massachusetts. And then 2029, we'll be in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very exciting. I appreciate that. Any other business to come before us? Dennis?
A question for Bob. Is there any update on the status of lawsuits with the Maryland folks?
Yeah, I think the short answer is the charter boat captains in Maryland appealed to the 4th District Court, and ASMFC filed our response to their appeal last Friday, I believe it was. So now we're waiting on the plaintiffs will have a chance to respond to our response, and then the court will take some action. I don't know what the timeline is, but it's ongoing.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dennis. I think that's good to have XCOM updated on that. Not seeing any other hands, so we will adjourn XCOM. Do we want to try and move up, or will we?
I think we
stay
probably
with our
need to
start
keep
date?
Sturgeon at 10:15 just because a number of people are showing up just for that meeting, and we've informed the councils that the
True.
assessments are going to be presented.
Okay, folks, there you are. We will break till 10:15.